Hello everyone. We are continuing with our series titled Studies in the Book of Proverbs. And in this particular video, we are going to start a topic called as Warnings Against Adultery. Now, the book of Proverbs is a book of wisdom in which practical life instructions and principles are provided. This is King Solomon trying to provide wisdom to the people that he is writing to. The first 7 chapters of the book of Proverbs are a series of instructions that a father gives to his son. In other words, Solomon is trying to teach his people, and he is trying to teach us, that wisdom is primarily taught at home. And in these 7 chapters, the father is instructing the son on the importance of pursuing wisdom. He tells them about the moral benefits of wisdom. He is also telling his son on how to handle peer pressure. He says that evil men will come to you and tell you to join them in order to make profit for yourselves, but this is how you are to respond to them. And so different kinds of instructions given by the father to the son. But interestingly, there is one particular topic that the father is focused on. And in these 7 chapters, there are 2 chapters that are fully devoted to discussing this topic. And this topic is the topic of adultery. Chapters 5 and 7 are fully on this particular topic. And then in chapter 2, you have verses 16 to 19. And in chapter 6, you have verses 20 to 35 that speak about this topic. So it seems like somewhere between 30 to 35% of the advice given by the father to the son is on this topic of sexual immorality. And I believe this is so because Solomon saw this as an important topic that fathers should be talking to their sons about. Now, the Bible as a whole has a lot to say about this God-given gift of sex. The Bible tells us that this is something that is to be enjoyed within the relationship of marriage between a husband and a wife. And anything outside it is sexual immorality. And we find examples and instructions of these kinds of things beginning from the first book of the Bible to the last book of the Bible. But in this video, we are going to focus our attention on the book of Proverbs, especially the first 7 chapters, especially chapters 5 and 7, and those verses from chapter 2 and chapter 6. Now, this video is going to be divided into 3 sections, or this study is going to be divided into 3 sections. Section 1 is going to talk about the temptations of adultery. Section 2, we are going to talk about the consequences of adultery. And in section 3, we are going to talk about the advice given to a young man regarding adultery. So let's get started with section 1, where we are going to talk about the temptations of adultery. Now, we're going to focus our attention on chapter 7 of the book of Proverbs, verses 6 to 23, where there is a case study provided by Solomon to explain to his son about how adultery, the temptation of adultery comes, and what the consequences are, and how he should stay away from it. This could be a real life case study that Solomon has observed with his eyes, or this could be an imaginary case study. Whichever be the case, let's look at it. Chapter 7, verses 6 through 9 first. At the window of my house, Solomon says, I looked down through the lattice, through the window. I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men, a youth who had no sense. Let's pause there for a minute and let's define the word simple. In the book of Proverbs, the word simple is used to denote people that are gullible, people that are easily deceived, people without a moral direction, and people who are easily slipping into sin. And this verse also says, I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men, a youth who had no sense. In other words, a person whose self-control faculties were not yet fully developed. So he is talking to his son, and he says that among the simple, I saw a young man who was gullible. Verses 8 and 9 talk about this young gullible person. He was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in. Solomon is trying to tell his son that here is a gullible person at the wrong place at the wrong time. And he's trying to teach his son that being in the wrong place and being in the wrong time can cause you temptations. In other words, do not willingly go to places where you could be tempted. Avoid those times when you could be tempted. Solomon, during his day, some 3,000 years ago, is speaking to his context. But in our context, we have places, for example, right there in our house, on our mobile phones, on our computers, places that could tempt us. And therefore, Solomon is instructing us to stay away from those kinds of places and times when you are alone, when you are depressed, when you are angry. Those could be times when you are tempted even more. So Solomon trying to instruct us that we are to avoid places and avoid times that could cause us temptation. Let's read from verses 10 to 13, and I want to speak about two sources that become the gateways for temptation. And we are going to read that, but I want us to focus our attention on these two gateways. Solomon is speaking about the eyes and the mouth. He's speaking about what you see and what you communicate. And these two becoming two important gateways for temptation. Let's talk about the eyes first. Verse 10, then came out a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute and with crafty intent. In other words, the way she dressed herself, anyone who saw her with the eyes, they had no doubt about her intent. She was out there to seduce and to allure. In other words, the adulterous woman knew that the gullible, simple person would fall into this sexual immorality through his eyes, and therefore she has dressed herself for that very purpose. Chapter 6, verse 25, where Solomon is talking about this same topic, he says, do not lust in your heart after her beauty. In other words, let not your eyes lead you into temptation. It also says, or let her not captivate you with her eyes. In other words, the adulterous woman can communicate using her eyes. The eyes that are flirtatious, the eyes that are seductive. And so Solomon is telling his son, don't let the look on her eyes seduce you or entice you. Do not let her captivate you with her eyes. In other words, you need to have a pre-decided response to how you would respond to a person who is communicating something through her eyes. Also, you are to tell your eyes that I will not lust in my heart after someone's beauty. Which is why Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 verse 28 speaks about anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So Jesus also saw the eyes as a gateway for temptation, and therefore he is saying that you are to take care of yourself. You are not to allow your eyes to be a gateway for temptation. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 14, speaking of the false teachers, says that their eyes are full of adultery. In other words, they have eyes that are seeking for opportunities for adultery. Job chapter 31 verse 1, Job says, I have made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman. So here is a gentleman who has made a covenant with his eyes that he would not look lustfully at a woman. And therefore, that's the kind of approach that we need to be taking, is what Solomon is trying to advise us. So Solomon tells us about the first gateway for temptation towards sexual immorality, and that's the gateway of the eyes, one's own eyes. The other person could also use their eyes to communicate, but we have to decide as to what we let in through our eyes. Number two, we talk about the mouth, or the words, or the communication. Verses 11 onwards of chapter 7, she is unruly and defiant. Her feet never stay at home. Now in the street, now in the squares, at every corner she lurks. She took hold of him and kissed him, and with a brazen face she said. And then we have verses 14 to 20, 6 or 7 verses that talk about what she said. But before we look into that, I want us to look at verse 21, where Solomon says to us, with persuasive words, she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. In other words, the adulterous woman, with her persuasive words, the way she used her mouth, the communication that she put forth, she was able to lead him astray, and she seduced him with her smooth talk. In other words, the mouth and what is communicated between two individuals can become an important gateway for this trap into, or temptation into, sexual immorality. Persuasive words and smooth talk. I want us to come to chapter 5, where Solomon is discussing the same topic, and the father is advising the son, and he says, for the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. So the lips are dripping honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. In other words, the father is advising the son, you have to be careful that you do not fall into the trap, into the temptation that she has got for you. Chapter 6, verses 23 to 24. Solomon is there instructing the son about keeping the father's instructions and the mother's commands. And he says, for this command is a lamp, this teaching is a light, and correction and instruction are a way to life, keeping you from your neighbor's wife, from the smooth talk of a wayward woman. The smooth talk of a wayward woman. So we have Solomon in multiple places in chapter 7, in chapter 5, chapter 6, speaking about how the mouth, or the communication between two individuals, can be a temptation, can be a gateway into sexual immorality. Now, mind you, in all these chapters, the woman is the adulterous person, and she is the one trying to seduce this young, gullible guy. This is because these are series of instructions given by a father to a son. This does not mean that women alone are the ones that tempt other people and men don't tempt anyone. If this is a series of instructions that a father would be giving his daughter, or a mother would be giving her daughter, she would be talking about temptations that come from men for women. And so we need to understand that when we are talking about this. So the eyes are a gateway. The mouth is also a gateway. Now, a lot of communication happens through verbal language, and a lot of communication happens through non-verbal language as well. In Solomon's time, there was no social media, there was no text and call. Every interaction or communication was a face-to-face communication. But in the world that we live in today, communication can happen through several different media, text messages, calls, WhatsApp, Telegram, and then you have Facebook and Instagram and all those hundreds of places through which communication can be done. And therefore, Solomon is telling us that we are to keep ourselves from smooth talk, from seductive communication. In fact, a lot of people get trapped today into messages that they get, which seem so simple and very straightforward, but soon slip into seduction, and many people fall into that trap, and then they are finally caught into it, and they are not able to escape from it. So what are we talking about? We are looking at the book of Proverbs, and we are looking at warnings against adultery, and we are in section 1 where we are talking about the temptations of adultery. Now look at the conversation in chapter 7 verses 14 to 20. What exactly does she communicate to this young gullible person, the case study that Solomon is talking about? First of all, note the use of religious language to seduce. The use of religious language to seduce. Verse 14. She is telling the young man, "Today I have fulfilled my vows, and I have food from fellowship offering at home." In other words, she is telling this man, "You should not consider me as a godless, wicked lady. I am a religious person. I have just fulfilled my vows to the Lord, and I have food from the fellowship offering, very tasty meat, and so on." So she is trying to grab him with her words. But this is a religion which has no ethics attached to it. This is a religion that is coming from a dead conscience or a mortified conscience. But the fact that religion is brought into this communication, into this temptation, is very interesting. And also note the attention and the false praise that is given to the victim. Verse 15, she says, "So I came out to meet you. I looked for you and have found you." In other words, she praises this gullible young man. She says that you are the kind of person that I was looking for. In fact, I was looking for you. You are so special. You are so unique. You are the kind of person. In other words, this false praise is going to work in the mind of this gullible person, and he is going to fall into the temptation, and therefore the mouth being a gateway for temptation. In verses 16 to 18, I want us to see how all these senses are being awakened by this adulterous woman. The sense of taste, the sense of sight, the sense of smell, the sense of hearing, and the sense of touch. All the 5 senses that a human being has is being awakened by this adulterous woman to trap this young man into sexual immorality. Look at what she says. She says, "I have covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt." She says, "I have perfumed my bed with myrrh and aloes and cinnamon." And therefore in verse 18, "Come, let's drink deeply of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love." In other words, she is getting this person to be excited, to be aroused in all the senses. And look at verses 19 and 20. She is trying to promise this young person safety and security. She knows that she needs to calm the fears of this young person. This is not just a woman doing to a young boy. This can happen from a man to a young lady as well, trying to calm her fears and her sense of security. Nothing harmful is going to happen to you is the promise being given. Look at verses 19 and 20. She says, "My husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took his purse filled with money and will not be home till full moon." In other words, young man, you don't have to be afraid. There is no risk involved. My husband is not going to catch you. He has gone away on a long journey. He has enough of money with himself. He is going to stay away. When I was reading and studying these passages, I went to a particular commentary by a pastor by the name David Guzik, and he tells this in his commentary. He says, "Many people are willing to commit sexual immorality when they feel that there is little or no risk of being discovered." In other words, many people don't get into sexual immorality because they fear being caught and being exposed and all of that. But David Guzik says that many people do enter into sexual immorality when they feel that there is little or no risk of being discovered. And that's exactly what is being promised to this young man. You have no risk. You will not be caught. There is no exposure, etc., etc. And all these promises are lies, as we would very well see. And with that, we conclude section 1, where we were talking about the temptations of adultery. And in our next video, we are going to look at the consequences of adultery. And I think Solomon outlines at least 10 consequences of adultery that come to a young man who fell into this trap. The trap that was laid for him for his eyes, and the trap that was laid for him through the communication that was presented to him. I believe that these advices given by Solomon to us, or the father to a son, would keep many a young man and many a young woman from falling into this trap, because the consequences of this are immense and they stay with us till the end of our lives. And so in next video, we would continue our study on the warnings against adultery. We would be talking about the consequences of adultery.